love Sherry, and if you love Sherry, I know she loved you too. You wouldn't be here. And the people who didn't know my mother are here because they love me, so thank you for being here, and I love you. And I'm completely overwhelmed by that. Everyone said. She's here, I know, and these are her pearls, and she wore all the time. So when I want to be with her, I wear the pearls. And so what we're going to do tonight is, the first thing I want to say is this. There were two very special people who couldn't be here, who were the most important caregivers for Sherry in the past 11 years, which were treacherous. It was, as I've tried to explain to people, her death is not the tragedy. The tragedy is she lost her life when she was 81, 82, and after George died. And my kids and I have an interpretation that when George died, she just shut down. She just didn't really care to be that conscious anymore. That's what we think, because she was never diagnosed, by the way. I don't believe she had Alzheimer's. It didn't follow that route. She did have dementia, but strangely, she always knew me, and she always knew her grandchildren to the last day. Always. When nothing else was apparent to her, that was. And when she would see the three of us, she would light up and know us by name. I would test her all the time. What are your grandchildren's names? And she knew, always knew. She always knew. So, the Dolores, who is the daughter of Elvira, and Reuben, who is Elvira's son-in-law. Elvira is my soulmate, and she was the angel that came into our lives.
God, now I'm gonna cry.
So it's a shame she couldn't be here. She had a tragedy that happened in Santo Domingo to a friend of hers, so she had to fly back. But she's here in spirit for sure. And another caregiver, Ingrid, who was the sister of another caregiver, one of the original ones, Linda, who was also killed in a bus accident in her country. And Ingrid couldn't make it because she broke her arm or did something to her arm this past week. But I just want to honor caregivers. When I would say prayers for my mother, I would pray for all the caregivers in the world because they were extraordinary. People who have that in their genes, where it's what they're meant to do, and you can't imagine how they're doing what they're doing, and they get paid so little for it usually, and they got me through. They got me through 11 years of really tough times. So I'm happy to answer any questions later. Anything you want to know about my mom and what happened to her, or what, don't feel like you don't want to pose and ask me. I'm happy to explain to anyone who wants to know anything. Ted Tyberg was her doctor of many years, and she remembered Ted. If I ever mentioned Ted, in fact, if my mother wouldn't eat, we'd say, Ted Tyberg says you have to eat. And she would take another bite. I swear to God. Whatever you said. You just and I told all the caregivers everywhere through all these years, you have to know the name Ted Tyberg and just tell her Ted Tyberg said she has to do this. So you were a secret weapon throughout. And he was also my guardian angel, because even through when he was no longer a doctor and on the East Coast and we were on the West Coast, I would call him in desperation and, what should I do now? And what he just guided me through. And I also am really grateful to you for, in the end, advising me. It was very hard when she went into hospice care for me. That was me having to let go of my control. And she was basically given, as you thought as well, 3 months to live. I would send him all the tests. I would scan him everything and send him everything. And so when she went into hospice care, at first I was furious at hospice because all this equipment landed on my doorstep, and well, of course it was the right thing to do. It was great that they did that. And then I grew to love them. I also have to praise hospice care And I chose well. It was a small, family-owned, all Russian, and they were amazing, and they guided me through. But Ted Tyberg, Dr. Tyberg, in the end, I was surprised by she had pneumonia a few times or an infection, and they would give her an antibiotic, and I said, why are we giving her an antibiotic? I was confused by this, and I thought, is this the time that I should stop? And they said you could tell if you want to. You don't have to. We advised, and you said, put it in the hands of hospice. You can't make that decision. So that's what I did, and it was so the right thing to do. I'm writing something now that'll probably, God knows how long it'll take. I'm writing something called My Mother's Final Hour. It was an extraordinary hour for me. I thought it would be the worst thing that ever happened to me. And it was one of the most amazing blessings of my life that I was there for her and climbed into bed with her. She was, pretty much gone, but she vaguely opened her eyes. And there was a hospice nurse there who I'd never met, who was only there that last hour of her life, who was guiding me so I could guide my mom. It was an extraordinary experience to be there with her as she died, and to be saying to her, the whole mishpucha's on the other side, Mom. They're waiting. They've been waiting for years. You see George, like there's a long list, they're all there. And I just kept talking to her and talking to her and talking to her and talking to her until she took her last breath. So I wanted you to know that. It was an amazing last hour. And thank God I was there. I didn't know it was that important to me to be there, but my daughter said, but you'd always be so nervous when you went to Europe, and what if it happens? What if it happens? What if it happens? I thought I had come to terms with it could happen any time, but it's wonderful that I was there. So I'm grateful for that. And she wasn't in pain when she died, thanks to hospice. So, all right. So I think that covers some of the things I wanted to cover.
That's great, Kathy. You did a really good job.
Yeah.
Tell us all. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. I'm drifting, like a ship out on the sea. I'm drifting, like a ship out on the sea. Yeah. I got no one in this world. I got no one to care for me. If only my baby would only come back to me, yeah. If my baby would only come back to me, oh no. Oh, I feel so much better now, 'cause at least I have a friend. I gave her my money, yeah. What more can I do? I gave her my money, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, what more can I do? And the funny thing is, sweetheart, all that I want is you. Thanks, guys. And then, So I didn't write that. Ray Charles and Eric Clapton have done a way better version of that. But I did write this song.
Sherry published their books.
Exactly. So I have rights to it, but I know there's a lot of literary agents in the room. I have rights. But I did write this song, and it's called "Leave It to the Sun." So I'll play that. Leave it to the sun to say. Lying there, you look like the horizon lying to me, close enough to touch but too far to reach. And I know that in the light I have to go. But tonight, your love is all I wanna know. And so take my hand, well then I'll run for life. Our loved ones didn't take the do's and don'ts, and the reason that we won't is just put them out of your head. I said, take my heart to bed. Well, then I'll run for life. Our loved ones didn't take the do's and don'ts, and the reason that we won't is just put them out of your head. Maybe you're wrong. I know we may be wrong, but either way, yeah, we'll leave it to the sun to say. Leave it to the sun to say.
Joni. They're nominated. Joni Evans, everybody. Woo! Mika, thank you. Where are you?
I'm here.
Bravo.
Well, I wrote things down because I'm old.
Not yet.
So Sherry, well, we all know her, so I was going to try to describe her to you, but you all know her more than me. She was a life force. And you know how people say the glass is half empty, the glass is half full kind of personality? She was like a bubbling over. You couldn't stop her. Her optimism and her sense of you can do anything. Anyway, I came to William Morrow, where's Larry, in 1968. At that point, it was the sleepiest place even with the Larry. And these are the people who work there. Larry Hughes, James Finkenstad, John C. Willey, oh my heart, Bill McPherson, Helen King, Howard Cady, Hillel Black, James Landis, and Ann Branson. That's something. Well, and we published, as far as I could tell, 2 people. Mary Stewart and Earl Stanley Gardner. And Earl Stanley Gardner, of course, wrote a book every 10 minutes. So we and that was it, you know. And I was like, my role was manuscript girl. I was very proud of that. I want you to know that was a big thing. Anyway, so Sherry walks in one day. I don't know who found her. And there is this tall, gorgeous woman. I mean, she was beautiful. And she was very exotic. And she had gorgeous jewelry. I remember she had 2 black rings that I used to own. And I'm watching Kathy's hands tonight, but they're very similar. Bigger than life all the time, always. Anyway, so I said to her, you know, we have 2 big authors, and she goes, we're going to have so many big authors. We're going to be so big. And I had a couple of books that I was afraid to get, you know, lost. I had a very, very small amount of books, and I would say, you know, Sherry, you just made a book like The Peter Principle, a huge bestseller. Now, I have a couple of books that I'd like to publish. We better not publish them until we have time. Like, give it some. And she said, Joni, we can always handle success. And those words just rocked me. I mean, it was just like, just the more success you can bring, don't ever hold back, which is meaningful. People didn't talk that way at William Morrow then. She was also extremely inclusive. I remember her walking in with her 2 beautiful daughters. She included us in every event. There was so much emotion and drama, and of course, when Doreen died, it was a family spirit. We all stayed close. When she moved to East Hampton, we were just talking about East Hampton. Do you remember the wolf spider story?
Yes, of course.
So
you
Sherry,
can find it online.
so Sherry and George are in East Hampton, and only Sherry could say it. There's a spider in this house. It is the size of a dinner plate. It is the wolf spider. And everybody would call, you know, real estate went down today. She had such a way. But of course she was friendly with Jackie Suzanne. It was always that, when are we going to publish Jackie Suzanne? And sure enough, after Valley of the Dolls or whatever came, after Once Is Not Enough came whatever was the big one, The Love Machine. And she didn't tell us, and we didn't all know, but Jackie was dying of a cancer. And Jackie didn't want anyone to know. She wanted to be the first person ever to have 3 #1 bestsellers in a row. Nobody ever had done that in fiction. So William Morrow had a big party for her out in Los Angeles, the Beverly Hills Hotel. And that very day, Jackie collapsed, had been having chemotherapy. And I was with Sherry, who said, the party is going on. I said, how can the party go on? She said, the party is going on. And I remember her saying to Jackie, can you sit up? So Sherry on a high chair in the Beverly Hills Hotel right in the entrance and propped her up. And Jackie sat there and said hello to every person coming in. And everyone thought that was, that was what the point was. I don't think she ever went inside. And it didn't matter, and that book went to #1.
Wow.
And I remember Sherry's, the tears coming from her eyes when it was #1. She just wanted to give Jackie that gift. So, final story, personal story. I left William Morrow in 1974 and went to Simon & Schuster. Had a very nice time. Had a wonderful time. And married, we don't mention his name in public. In the middle of a horrible divorce. I mean, the divorce from hell that went on for, by the way, married 9 years, divorce took 7 years. But in the middle of the divorce, the point of the divorce was, his point was, Joni was nobody. She couldn't be anything if it weren't for me. And my point was, I'm kidding. But anyway, I couldn't get anyone to say that because he was so intimidating and everyone still worked for him and nobody would testify or say for him. So I'm like, there must be someone who can say something nice about him. And I called Sherry. And in fact, I didn't call Sherry. My lawyer called Sherry because you're not allowed to talk to the person. Anyway, Sherry, fade out, fade in, is on the stand. I have not seen Sherry for 3 years, and she comes out for me, and she sits down, and whatever my lawyer said is, but she said, look, let me make this clear. Joni's a star, okay? That's all I have to say. So I won, all right? So all I wanted to say was, she's here. Just the best inspiration, the best friend, the best spirit, and I can feel you all know this, so anyway, celebrate.
Lynn?
Anyway, I definitely, unfortunately, was not mentored by Sherry. And I was often, I was the agent and she was the buyer. But we developed an incredibly helpful and healthy respect for each other. And in the good old days of publishing, Larry, in which you and Betty, and there are very few of us in this room who are still working, other than Elizabeth Charlotte and Bill Schwabe, who are now currently in the mix. It's a very different business. It's very corporatized. Even when the unmentionable Dick Snyder was there, he still had passions. Nowadays, it's sort of passionless, except everything is the bottom line. What are the numbers? And it is very driven by Amazon. But in the good old days, it was a terrifically fun business. And Sherry was not only Sherry Arden, but an ardent supporter of her writers and her projects. And we shared many together. And you could always count on Sherry for her ebullience, her good nature, her understanding that books had to sell, but that the authors, in some sense, had to be celebrated, even when perhaps the numbers weren't as good as they should be. She always hung in there. And I could always call her and know that she was a friend at court. And it was a wonderful, wonderful way to be. Now, the most funny and great experiences that I had with Sherry were on our way to Frankfurt Book Fair. Because we would often travel, we would arrange to go on the same flight to Paris, and then we'd spend a few days in Paris. And I can remember one flight in which, as Lisa reminded me tonight, Lisa Queen, who was head of their sub-rights, had to sleep on the floor somewhere there was not a seat for her. And the plane, I'm not sure, there was another, maybe it was the same year when somehow there were all kinds of engine difficulties, and Sherry and I were just drinking champagne for hour after hour and exchanging. And I was a drama major in college, so I could sympathize, empathize with all her stories. And then the incredibly memorable evening was in Paris when Mara was publishing Robichon. And we went, Larry hosted this amazing dinner at Le Germain, which was in the 14th or 15th arrondissement. I have never, I mean, he was a 4- or 5-star chef, and we got every course on the menu, every wine that they could serve. We were there for, I think, 5 hours. All I can remember is that I stumbled into Frankfurt the next day thinking, can I really make it through the day? The combination of all that. Sherry, of course, was sailing through. And I'm a little embarrassed tonight about my shoes because Sherry had the chicest shoes in the world. She was the one who told me about Robert Clergerie, and she would run to their shop as soon as we got to Paris and buy the latest styles.
But Lynn, she never wore high heels. That's what she wore.
Yes, but the
She
Robert,
never
these
wore
were
high
not, these
heels.
are Todds. They're not Robert.
Times have changed.
She always had the chicest shoes that went with her fantastic haircut. You know, she was a style setter. There is no two ways around it. But what we all loved, whether we were mentored by her like Joni or whether I was an agent selling to her, what we loved about her was her generosity of soul, her incredible kindness, her warmth, her enthusiasm, her ability to hang in and be supportive. And I wish we had a Sherry today, but we don't. But thank you, Larry, for making Morrow the place that it was then and hiring Sherry. It was a fantastic, fantastic place.
Larry, do you want to say a few? Just stay right there. Just say a few words.
Wait a minute, somebody got hold of my cane.
You don't have to get up. We can hear you.
Look, let me go back to Jackie Suzanne for a minute because Sherry, when she arrived at William Isle, brought something that money can't buy. And she brought enthusiasm, and she brought, what shall we say, optimism. And that's something that, you can't quantify in dollars and cents. Nonetheless, Sherry was very shrewd about dollars and cents. And she was what I would call a force. And a force has to have persistence. And she was persistent about things, and if she thought something should happen, she kept at it. Anyway, one day she came to me and she said, I've got to be friends with Jackie and Irving Mansfield, Jackie's husband. And she said, I don't think they're wildly happy. She's wildly happy at Simon & Schuster's arguing, but I don't think she was. And I think we ought to talk to her about how about Morrow Publishing. I said, oh, come on, Sherry, look, we have enough headaches here. and I hear she's very, very difficult, and she's going to be very, very expensive. So I said, let's put that out of our minds for a moment. Well, Sherry wouldn't put it out. And finally she said to me, Larry, you have got to come and have lunch with Jackie. So I said, oh, okay, So we had lunch, and I found Jackie Suzanne to be somebody entirely different from who I thought she was. She had not been pictured as a, let's say, gracious person or a gentle person in any way. And I was captivated by her because she was a lovely, lovely person. At least that's the way she said when I talked to her at this luncheon. Okay, so a few weeks go by, and Sherry comes to me and she says, well, Jackie's waiting to hear from you. I said, she's waiting to hear from me. Yes, we're meant to make an offer. I said, wait a minute. I mean, this is big stuff, and I'm already getting pressure that we're putting too much money in advances and all this and all that. Well, she wouldn't let that go, and she said, you've got to come and have another lunch. And she said, and we want to bring Jim Landis along, because when she comes to us, we'll have him as the editor. So I said, okay, so we get in a cab, we start uptown, and we're passing a flower shop, and Sherry said, stop, wait a minute. She runs into the flower shop, and she gets, I don't know how many dozen yellow roses, let's say 3 or 4 dozen. She said, we're going to give these to Jackie. So we get up to the 21 Club, and Sherry says, well, wait, we're not going to give it to her right yet. So we put it in the cloak closet. Okay, so we sit down, and we're having a lovely lunch, we really are. And so finally, I think Jackie probably said, well, look, are you guys going to talk to Irving about making a deal, possibly? And I said, look, Jackie, I said, why would you ever want to leave Simon & Schuster? I said, they're one of the best publishers in the world. They do a terrific job. They've made, it was called Love Machine, a #1 bestseller, because Bernie Geist published Valley of the Dolls. And so, you know what, you're all set there, you know why? She said, there's one thing that's lacking. I said, what? She said, I want to be treated as a human being, not as a money machine. So I said, so at that point, Sherry leaps up, runs into the cloakroom, some guy with 3 dozen yellow roses, and said, here, we love you. Well, so Jackie said, oh, lovely. She said, if you guys can make a deal with Irving, I'm going to be published by William Morrow. And eventually we did. And that's how she came to Morrow. And I must say, Jackie was quite a person. She wasn't a schmaltz, what should we say, cheap person of any kind. She was really a lovely person, and I didn't know at the time that she had cancer, but I did find that out, and she was amazing because she never let on that she was sick during this period when we published Once Is Not Enough, which also was a #1 bestseller. So that's the story of Sherry getting Jackie Sudan to come to William Morrow Company, which was quite an accomplishment. This is not the only accomplishment she made. There were many people who came, authors and editors. Anne Branson, I think I'm right in saying that it was your friendship with Sherry were interested in our company. Am I right?
You're right.
I'm right. Okay, good. And so she contributed a lot of things, personally and by extension. And for that, I'm extremely grateful because anything that was good for William Morrow Company turned out to be pretty good for me. Anyway, I think this is a wonderful idea. Thank you very much.
Rod. So now on a personal note, this is Rod Cates, the father of my amazing children. And Rod adored my mother, and she adored him. When they first met, fireworks went off. So he has
Yeah, I was thinking
some
about
things to
that,
say
and
about
people
it.
say mother-in-law sort of pejoratively, and it was so the opposite for me. I remember already being in love with Kathy, and then meeting her mother, and it's so great to hear these stories because she was clearly somebody who lived by buoying other people up. She would just infuse the room and the person that she was talking to with so much energy. I can remember just being fascinated by her. I mean, it wasn't just her. For me, she represented things that I had never seen before. You know, somebody who worked on Madison Avenue, you know, came home in a hired car, had lunch with Peter Bogdanovich, and then she got in her schmata, and she would just make dinner. And she had these two different personalities, and I was so fascinated by both of them. And I was thinking sort of about what is in Anya and Mika, sort of what the things that you share. But some of the most vivid memories of Sherry, it's funny Lynn said about her shoes, because she did have amazing shoes. I mean, and, you know, like I'm not even into shoes really, but you couldn't, and I wasn't even really into fashion per se, but Sherry, I remember one day it was emblazoned on my mind. I will never forget it. It was the most amazing outfit I'd ever seen. I'm going to describe it to you now. It was red, and it had a shawl collar, a black lapel shawl collar that went all the way down, and she had these fabulous little black pumps, and that's what she was wearing the day that she invited me to lunch. So I didn't get the Jackie Suzanne lunch, I didn't get the roses, but she took me to lunch one day, and I remember having the feeling, I don't know, where would we have been? In some restaurant over on Madison Avenue that I think she went to all the time. And she sat there and talked to me about my career as if I were Jackie Suzanne or Peter Bogdanovich or somebody writing a book. And I was I was at this company, which has turned out to be a very large company. And I remember I was talking to her about this and that, and I was going to do my deal, and she looked at me and she said, "You ask for a lot of money." And it kind of scared me a little bit. But she said, "You know, you don't have to be greedy or ugly about it," but she said, "You need to know what you're worth." And listening to the stories that I'm hearing tonight about the way that she, you know, she made you feel so valuable. She made me believe that I was worth anything I could ask for. She made me believe that I could do anything that I wanted to do. And, you know, I remember thinking when I was lucky enough to be around her and in her orbit, that it was really a legacy. You know, it's not an exaggeration to say that she was a one of a kind. She was somebody that if we still had people like that, if there were still opportunities like that. But I guess each one of us still has that opportunity, right? We all knew her, we all had a moment when she did that, right? She looked at us and shook her finger at us and said, "Don't be less. Don't be less. Be everything that you can be." And that gave her life. And not surprisingly, continues to give her life. And for as long as I'm around and you guys are around and your kids are around and we tell these stories, Sherry Arden, she'll always be there. She'll always be there with us.
I have something too, and then my son will. And then, oh yes, yes, Ted, speak. Yeah, anyone who wants to just jump in, go ahead.
So, my wife asked me when we came here, how did Sherry come to you?
And I couldn't remember until Joni Evans got up, because Joni Evans was the editor for Isidore Rosenfeld and sent
Sherry to that office, and I started with Izzy Rosenfeld. And so Sherry stayed with me. And
when you said light source,
that was the right word, because Sherry was the type of person who every doctor loves. If somebody who knew her said, "My toenail hurts," I have the doctor for you. Mr. White, I have the doctor for you. Every single time I turned around, Sherry had somebody for me. It didn't matter what was wrong with them. It didn't matter what I did. I have the best doctor in the world. I love her. She was the same way, by the way, about restaurants. She was the same way about everything. She was a life source. What was interesting was that George, on the other hand, her husband, was the brake on Shelley. Where Sherry was completely ebullient, George was cool, calm, collected, was always putting in the aside that said, "Oh yeah, that's true, but," that was George. And then the last thing I want to tell you about is one of the things that Kathy was talking about was that 12 or 13 years before she died, Sherry basically lost her memory of things, other than some things. But something unbelievable happened. Do you remember this?
It happened
Multiple
about 3
times.
Yeah.
when she became normal,
So
and no one knew why.
Sherry she came to me originally because one of the valves of her heart was diseased. We took her through surgery. She flew through it. She was unbelievable. The surgeon became the best surgeon on the planet. It became the best doctor on the planet. It became the best hospital on the planet. All of that was great. And then she developed disease in another valve. And by then she was demented is the word, which means that you don't really remember very much. And she had surgery, and the day after surgery, she was Sherry Arden. She remembered everything. It lasted 24 hours. I had every doctor I could think of see her. You remember?
And I knew no one would believe me, so I put her on the phone with him.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Well, and
So there'd
everybody.
be a witness aside from me. And, yeah,
We
so,
had neurology, we had everybody, psychiatry, everybody.
yeah.
Nobody could figure it out, and 24 hours later, she went back into
She went
her
back
shell.
into the sleep mode.
And I actually agree with you, Kathy. I think that she turned off.
Yeah,
I don't think it
yeah.
was any
Mika, where are
instruction.
you?
Over here.
Yeah, my son was the first with that theory, and he, to this day, he'll tell you that's what happened.
And I think that's what happened. And the last thing is that a friend of mine and I wrote a book called Hospital Smarts, which George named, and Sherry was our agent because she was my patient. Nobody would buy the book. We wrote a proposal, nobody would buy it. And then at her 70th birthday, Kathy said, why doesn't everybody write something about Sherry? So I wrote something about Sherry. I don't remember exactly, but it was like a waltz wafting through the windows of an apartment in Vienna during this, whatever. Anyway, at the end of that dinner, one of the people who was there said, well, if you can write like that, we're buying his book. We sold 42 copies. 41 my mother bought. But just so you know, Sherry will always live for me about a million things, but we now have a website that is the book.
Oh my God! Oh, fantastic! Hospital Smarts, everybody. And it's how to survive
Your hospitalization.
your hospitalization. Yeah.
That's a great.
Thank you. And just so you all know, I didn't mention, my children and I, and also just to honor my children who have gotten me through. Where's Anya?
Right here.
These two amazing adults who have gotten me through these years were always at the end of the phone, always came to me, they were always there, and I wouldn't be here without them.
Are you talking about this weekend? This weekend.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Okay.
So we've had a journey this weekend. First of all, should I begin with George? I held on to George's ashes. George died in 2002. And George was my stepfather. And by the way, my mother would be proud to say he also happened to be my cousin because they were first cousins. So there you go. She loved shocking people, and he would just like hide. My mother and stepfather were first cousins. But he was really my father from when I was a young teen. And he was grandfather to my children, and an amazing man and father and grandfather. And his wish his whole life was to be cremated and have his ashes scattered with the gorillas at the Bronx Zoo. This is what he wanted. He was devoted to gorillas. He used to say they saved him as a child. He had a really treacherous childhood. He lived up in the Bronx. He would escape to the Bronx Zoo, and he would just watch the gorillas. And then he became an amazing imitator of them and would entertain my kids when they were small. And he gave to gorilla foundations, and they were a big deal to him, really important. And so, but he died in 2002, and this was after 9/11, and it became against the law to scatter ashes in a public place. So, and then my mother got sick not too long after, and she couldn't be, at first she was in grief, and there's no way we could scatter any ashes anywhere with her. So I just left it alone. I kept the box of ashes up in my closet. And then she became sick and got dementia. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just hanging on to these ashes until I've got hers. I mean, there was nothing I could do. So, my mother died on January 27th, and I had told her within the year before she died, when she still had some wits about her, a plan that I came up with to do with both of their ashes, which was they had a house in East Hampton, and their favorite thing to do was to rush through dinner and to drive over to Louse Point, the bay, and watch the sunset. George would also love going there at 4 in the afternoon when everyone was leaving. And he would wait, always waiting, he never swam. He'd wait in the water, and she would sit reading her manuscripts on the bay beach. So I decided that I would bring their ashes to Louse Point. They lived there had that house for 12 years, 15 years, whatever it was, and it was really their favorite place. So I told my mother, and she liked the idea. I also said we'd all be doing this, and she said, that's good. She said, that sounds good. So, but after she died, my daughter said, did you want to write to the Bronx? And I said, I did. What happened was the gorilla habitat changed. Yeah. There's no longer a ravine. All you see is they're behind glass. It's wonderful, but George never got to see that and didn't know that. So I had just I didn't even pursue it. Unbeknownst to me, my daughter wrote to the Bronx Zoo and wrote an amazing letter. And they couldn't email her back because they didn't want to be found out. Someone contacted her. You want to say, or you want me to say?
No, you can say.
Okay. So someone contacted Anya and said, we're going to escort you to the gorilla habitat, and yes, you may scatter some ashes of your grandfather in the gorilla habitat. So Saturday we went to East Hampton, took the jitney, and I was telling the jitney people who work on the jitney, I was on the first jitney in 1970, and which I was. And we brought the ashes. I have amazing photos. I didn't, some people might be shy about seeing ashes floating out in the water, but I split George's ashes into three parts. One for East Hampton, one for the Bronx Zoo, and another amount for his daughter who lives in Marin County, California. My stepsister, so she'll get some. So we did the ashes, and it was just amazing to float them out with a friend of hers, Leonida, who lives out in East Hampton, was there with us. And then 2 days ago, Sunday, no.
It was yesterday, Sunday.
It was yesterday?
Yeah.
Yesterday, we were told to get to the zoo before opening, and we were escorted to the gorilla habitat.
Oh.
And there was an amazing waterfall, and we threw the ashes into the waterfall. So thank you, Anya, for being so genius to have done this, and that's quite a mitzvah you did for your grandfather. So, okay, so I
Do you guys
just wanted to
remember
tell
him
you
doing the
that.
gorilla imitation?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they do?
Well, what was it? What did he do?
No, it was so good. It was, and he wouldn't.
Really did
He
well.
did it. I feel like I remember 4 times. He would make us wait months. He'd build up the expectation of no, not now, but the next visit and the next one and the next one, and it was so good. It was so worth the wait. But I literally think he did it 4 times in my entire.
No, they would.
He was
would
so
talk to
shy
me
about it.
shocked. How does he do that?
No, it was so good. It was so
Yeah.
realistic.
He became a gorilla.
Yeah.
His soul is there now. So I'm just going to read a couple of things. These really aren't recent things I've written, but they felt right to me to read tonight to you. You can read more about my mother on my blog. I've written a lot about her and about these past years. It's kathyarden.com/blog. It's called Raining Cats and Dogs is the name of the blog. And that's going to be the basis of another book. So I wrote this when my kids and I moved with my kids to Paris when they were young, 8 and 12. So we lived in Paris for a year, and then we've all gone back there. My son just came back from living in France for a year. So this was one of my visits to Paris just a couple of years ago. I wrote this piece one night. It's called My Mother and the Marigolds. I'm watching Japanese men harvesting wasabi on the only English TV channel in my rental apartment in Paris. As I eat my homemade croque monsieur, the men are tending the patties, wading into muddy waters in their high black boots. It reminds me of my mother tending her garden at her house in East Hampton so many years ago. But you know what so many years ago feels like. It feels like no time at all. It was always surprising to me that my mother, a businesswoman, knew about planting vegetable gardens. I don't know how she learned this. Her mother, a Russian immigrant, died from TB when my mother was 12 years old. My mother only remembered her as being ill and spending months at a time at what was then called a sanatorium. This is where they sent people with TB. The point here is that my maternal grandmother never tended a garden, at least not during my mother's lifetime. But my mother created a vegetable garden soon after she and my stepfather bought their house in East Hampton. My mother also helped me create a vegetable garden at my first house in Nyack, New York. But I never tended to it without her. My mother and stepfather would come up from the city on most weekends to spend time with me and their grandchildren. And during the summers, my mother would plant and weed the garden. My garden really wasn't my garden at all. It was my mother's garden. I didn't do much except pull the vegetables from the ground or stems when they were ready for eating. My mother and I both kept up the pretense that I had a garden of my own, just like the one she had once had in East Hampton. The East Hampton house had sold decades before I lived in Nyack, so my mother's original garden was long gone. And now I watch these Japanese men, and I remember my mother in her rubber boots, in the prime of her life, sometimes still wearing her tennis skirt, bent over in the garden, her hands covered in green gardening gloves, pulling out new weeds that had managed to grow in spite of the carefully placed, brightly colored marigolds. And this I wrote when I was probably around Anya's age, 26, in my later 20s. And I was going through probably my first real separation from my mom. We were very merged, and Doran and my mother and I were all very merged. And I had to separate myself, and she was having a tough time with that. And heaven knows I probably was too. So I wrote this poem for her, which I framed and put in a frame with pictures of my mother and I, younger, and my sister and my mother. It was and she hung it on her wall, and it was there until the day she died. It always stayed with her. So it's called Anatomy of a Universe for my mother. What really did I know then about the knowledge of flesh, the difference between mine and yours? I knew of bones, the way mine protruded at angles I was sure were dangerous. No matter how cautiously I moved through the house, my body would bump into the edges of furniture. I learned all there was to know about the scraping of bones and the ache afterwards. I recognized you by your flesh, blue rivers close to the surface, just like mine. I could put my hand up against yours and know without knowing where I would always belong, a place where I would always be permitted entry. The proof was the perfect match of flesh against flesh. The difference, I thought, was in bones. There was something beyond comprehension in the grace and power of your arms that folded naturally around my frailness, creating an embrace that could hold me steady, rooted or lift me to wherever I wanted to go. Hand over hand, I climbed you as a braver child might climb a tree. Resting brittle bones in the fold of your limbs, I could move without moving if you moved, examine the geography of sharp corners below without fear of collision. I am in the position now of wanting to describe to you the extension of my limbs, how my arms now have the power of embrace, my legs the courage of movement. My bones are rounded, they have joints. I ask them to bend, and they do. I climb the terrain of my own body. It accepts the challenge of exploration in a new universe. The geography of this separation and emergence might be unfamiliar to you, but if you put your hand up against mine, you will know a place where you will always belong, a place where you will always be permitted entry. The woman you are facing you will surely recognize. I offer you myself, a place you can return to. So, just thank you again, all of you, for coming. If anyone wants to say anything else, or just talk amongst yourselves and tell me more stories. And please,
Who can remember her laugh? Do you remember?
oh yeah,
Yes.
that was
Everybody.
famous. That's right.
Yeah, best laugh.
Oh, Mika, you are gonna, yeah, you're gonna play another song, and then, yeah. And then that'll be it for the formal part of the evening. And if you haven't eaten, please do. There's wonderful food and drink, and if you don't have to leave right away, please do stay.
That was really cool, all that. I just want to say thank you. I mean, and it was said at the beginning, but yeah, I mean, all of my memories and my sister's memories of my grandma kind of were mostly contained when I was a little kid, and when I was like 11, 12, 13 years old, and before that. And they're wonderful memories, but I often kind of wish I could have conversations with her and George now and kind of ask them things that I couldn't have thought of when I was a little kid. And it's really cool to hear all of these stories because I'm kind of feeling like I can get a sense of what her answers would be. So yeah, thanks all you guys for speaking. It's really cool. I'd have one more song that I'm going to play. It's another song I wrote, and I had this song for a while. I wrote it like a year or so ago, a little bit more. And I had like the first verse down. I loved the first verse was killing. Lyrics were great. I really liked it, but I couldn't get the chorus down at all. I tried a million things, and so it just kind of sat in my pocket for a year. And then my mom called me and said that we were going to be doing a memorial service, and she wanted me to play music, and could I write a song for Bubby? I said, writing a song, it takes so long, and it's so important, I can't do it. But I picked up a guitar, and I sat down and tried to mess around with it, and I didn't write a new song, but I wrote the chorus and the second verse to this song that I had before, and it's a song that is, again, a bit bittersweet in a way, but the chorus was completely different than anything that I had tried to write before, and it took what is really kind of a sad song in the first verse and turns it into something that's a bit revitalizing, I like to think. And yeah, I think it kind of came somewhat through the spirit of my grandmother in some way. So anyway, I don't quite have a name for it yet, but I hope you guys like it. It's already over, and my head is raised. 4 years are ending, and memories will soon be erased. But you gave me something time can't take away. So fuck the real world, 'cause I'm not gonna lose you that way, and you can have the money, the city lights and the take my love, my loneliness and my guitar. So please, mash up me, 'cause I've been tearing down the walls for all that take care of my own. And I won't tell you I'm alright. I'll tell you how it's begun. And if you're looking for me, just look towards the sun. Master, don't let me leave. 'Cause I've been tearing down the walls for all that I believe. And all I wanted was a one-track mind to find the way out my feet. But it's not worth it if you're not with me.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you.
I know, it's not like it. Sitting down is fine, getting on.
I need to turn that on.